And Faith Time is our weekly conversation on matters of faith. So one of the prime directives for Christians is to witness to others and find new believers. And I spoke with Loxley Church Youth Pastor Kevin Mills recently about the changing way young Christians evangelize. So where do you start?
I mean, from the onset of when we look at Jesus' ministry, when we read the Gospels, for example, it all begins on the building block of just relationship, of just getting to know one another and working through that process together.
In what ways has the approach to evangelizing changed for teenagers over the past few decades?
Being a child of the 80s and 90s, I think a lot of that approach was very in your face. It was very turn or burn, or you're going to go to hell. There's a lot of fear antics involved. And I think the kids of today are a little bit different. I think sometimes they're viewed as being nebulous or just kind of unattached, but I think that's further from the truth. Honest to goodness, I think that the approach today is a lot more real. Teenagers don't like to be jibed. And so I think that as authentically as possible, it all builds in relationship. When we try to front and we're not ourselves in front of teenagers, they know it best. They're always just looking for something real.
You bring up that in-your-face Christianity approach. In what ways could young Christians maybe come on too strong and scare somebody away?
I think sometimes, I remember in high school as well, we had those individuals that would stand up on the lunch tables and they would begin to preach this doom and gloom gospel. And my answer to teens today is always the same, just be yourself, be authentic. We're going to mess up, and when you mess up, own it. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to cover it. Just be as transparent as possible. I think that in itself is the way that Jesus kind of did his ministry on earth, and that in itself is the way that I think we should live our lives every day.
So how much is this a process of checking in with somebody on a regular basis versus having maybe like one conversation and they see the light, as it were?
I think it's absolutely huge. I think that when we enter into some type of social contract with someone, when we enter into a relationship with that individual, it's key. We can't just take them to a certain place and then drop. Jesus never did that. It was always this continual walking together as we go through life. And so I think it's a very transitive thing. I think it's something that takes time. Whereas, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, it was almost this almost instantaneous kind of encounter. But I think today it's much more of a longer process that's involved in witnessing and talking about Jesus.
What do you think prompted that sort of change from the in-your-face approach to the being real approach?
I think my generation and maybe the generation before me just kind of got turned off by that. The in-your-face approach still works for some people, but not for all. I think that the world is shifting and it's changed. And if the message, while it doesn't shift and change, the approach does. And I think that with that comes a different formula of how to approach things and how to formulate things with individuals.
Can you give me an example in your life where witnessing you feel worked on another person?
I think there are times in ministry where you'll have someone come into a church who doesn't want to be there, but they're there for a reason. And I think sometimes it's in those moments where you really know that you've connected because you'll get past all the fronting. You'll get past that first initial defensive shield, and you're just able to connect with that person, and you're able to see them again, maybe over lunch or coffee, and you're able to kind of deconstruct maybe what someone has built in their life in the wrong ways. A lot of the things that I've experienced as a pastor over the last 10 years is really deconstructing some of the modes that some churches have put together. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that with the individual, it's not tailor-made. And so we have to kind of reshift some focuses and explain some things to try to help them understand and get to that next place.
Loxley Church Youth Pastor Kevin Mills, we thank him for joining us for this edition of Faith Time and News 5 this morning.